MarketMuse Content Strategy webinar in our series. Today is a special one, not just because my amazing guests, but also it's because we're talking about a massive research study that MarketMuse and iPullRank have put together on the state of generative AI. That's artificial intelligence, if you're not aware of that one. We're going to fill your head with other acronyms throughout this discussion, but I do want to introduce my guest, Garrett Sussman. He's the Demand Gen Manager. He has multiple broadcasting, podcasting, webinars that he's going to tell you about. But if you're not familiar with him, he's very, very knowledgeable about the topic and the perfect guest for us to discuss the study. He's also worked with us on this study in both the analysis and the execution. I'm Jeff Coyle, the co-founder and CSO of MarketMuse. And Garrett, why don't you tell everybody maybe that isn't as familiar with you a little bit about yourself?
Well, hey everybody, I'm sure that we have a lot of familiar faces. I mean, because we engage a lot with SEO Twitter and the community. But for those of you who don't know me, I've been with iPullRank for the past couple of years, been in marketing for over a decade, obsessed with this technology, well aware of its opportunities and limitations, love talking about it. I have a weekly SEO show that I call the SEO Weekly for iPullRank. And then we have a podcast. In fact, if you ever want to check it out, Jeff and I had a really great conversation all about the history of natural language generation, which ties right into this report that we did together. But excited to chat through the results of this survey report, as well as kind of where all of this is and going forward.
Beautiful. Well, thanks, Garrett. And if you did not know that there is a history earlier than 2023 for natural language generation, sometimes referred to as NLG, there is, and that includes LLMs or large language models and other stuff too. So there's more to natural language generation than just large language models or LLMs. So if you don't know that and you want to know more about that, go check out that recording. Just type in Jeff Coyle, Garrett Sussman, and see what you get, and you'll probably find that one as a recent episode. All right, so let's dig in. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about our agenda first. So we're going to be talking a lot about the State of Generative AI report. We're going to get into what are the most important use cases to consider. Does it help or hinder your workflow? Are you even thinking about workflow versus payload, which is a common mistake that we're seeing teams make constantly, is they're thinking of AI as the thing you get at the end versus it being part of your process. Where we are with trust and adoption, both from our data as well as our perspectives, and then where generative AI is going from the standpoint of content intelligence, content strategy, and where we think it's going to be going, where it already is, and examples, real examples, and then if there's any leftover questions. What did I forget? I know there's a slide here, but what other things are we going to talk about that I might have forgotten?
No, I think you covered most of it. I mean, the real like nuts and bolts of it is what people are thinking about generative AI, and then how you should think about it as an organization, like that real trust and adoption part. So it kind of flows through it. So let's dive in.
Cool. Okay, so first, if you haven't downloaded this, if you haven't grabbed it, you can get it afterwards after you hear all about it. But here's the link. So screenshot this. There'll also be a link in the show notes that's sent to you. But it's at iPullRank.com/the state of AI generated content with tabs in that slug, as we call it in the biz. All right. And now let's get into AI for idea generation. So idea generation, walking through a few components of this. What are the basic uses, right? We're talking about generative AI in text. 90% plus is what we're looking at. Imagery, 23.9 people have adopted this as part of their workflows. Video at 5.5, and then we haven't adopted any of these particular instances. So that's what we're starting to see with how frequently teams, and these are obviously slight bias, they've responded to a survey about this topic. However, the spread on the use cases is something that we are seeing, very similar to posts that we're seeing. If you look at the percentage of posts, when you look at that data, very similar to our survey responses. Any observations on this?
Yeah, I think to that point, I mean, so we got to remember back in November is when ChatGPT became available to the public. I think the accessibility of it is why you see text is so much more prominent than everything else. So, people didn't have to pay anything. They could get access. They were just trying it out. So people are using that and had more familiarity. We're seeing with tools like DALL-E and Midjourney, and we'll get a little bit to the tools in a bit. And then video just feels harder, and it feels like it isn't as developed as those other types of generative AI tools are out there. So it makes sense. To Jeff's point about the self-selection, it's not surprising that 7% are none of the above. I bet maybe in some more mainstream in other industries, because we saw a lot of marketing folks, a lot of enterprises, a lot of tech folks using this. Maybe there is a higher amount of none of the above, but this makes sense to me based on our audience.
Yeah, I think also it connects to the adoption journey of other types of things. So if it's somebody who is heavily focused on imagery and video already, more likely to adopt as what we saw. If it's where maybe they had a pain point on images and video, they were too costly, or they've had the ability to get access to something early. I think these are going to level out very soon, and we'll get to the situation where we have nearly 100% text, and video, audio are going to be next. Parts of the dynamic that's coming up. We also looked at some of the actual software that's in use. OpenAI, dominant. It was free for a while. The month-to-month plan rolling out at $20 for a significant number of features. You have some commercial products, which OpenAI is certainly commercial, but has some origins in non-commercial. But with Jasper and Writer, and then Midjourney being the image solution, which has a little bit of a learning curve to get into. It's not a traditional software purchasing experience. You can already see that manifest in the percentage of usage. Obviously the rollout. Many people in this world believe that AI is ChatGPT. They don't know that artificial intelligence is anything but. It's the only thing they think they have access to that is AI. They use Gmail. They don't realize that has so many different aspects of natural language generation. Even Smart Compose is an application of artificial intelligence. When you're typing and it finishes your sentence, right? There are applications coming that are going to be embedded in everything that we do. But as far as where somebody's overtly made a purchase or they've adopted a free solution, this was the spread that we're seeing, and this is very consistent. We are seeing that the second tier of these things is tending to go actually down. We're going to probably see a large second tier as OpenAI becomes ubiquitous. The large second tier maybe won't break 15% ever until killer apps come out. What's your take on that?
Yeah, and I feel like all of this is happening so rapidly. Right. So it's going to be interesting to see when we do like another survey and see the results and see how much they change compared to when this was originally taken. Because, for instance, Google I/O a few weeks ago talked about integrating generative AI in Google Workplace, so like Google Docs. So I can imagine that sort of accessibility, or if people are using, Bing Chat as an actual generative AI or Bard, we can see these surveys change depending on the players, and we might see more diversification as well, as there have been so many tools just coming on the market, like bam, bam, bam. So
do you think there's room though for another new brand to become ubiquitous, or do you feel like it's going to be co-pilots and add-ons? So Google's product, I believe the AKA is Duet, where it's going to be riding along with your Google Workplace experience. You've got Microsoft, who I believe has built a beautiful product in Copilot. It's going to ride along with your spreadsheet, riding along with your Word doc. It's like bringing back Clippy, but for today, right? If you don't know what Clippy is, oh gosh, I'm quite old, but it's an intelligent agent is the branch of science. There's a lot of great stories about how awesome that product was for its time, but it was too big to ship on a CD-ROM. All kinds of awesome stuff if you want to do some research there. But no, do you think there's room for another unknown brand to become ubiquitous, or is it going to be as part of a partnership? What's your take on that?
I think it's difficult to predict because, to your point, I do think we've got Adobe. Firefly has just recently come out, and they already have a partnership with Google.
Right.
The kind of silent, looming behemoths are the Apple, Meta, and Amazon. Meta is probably the most visible, working on something behind the scenes. But I think, to your point, there will be a lot of tools that are built on these other LLMs in the same way that almost like Amazon AWS has like websites built in the cloud. I anticipate that's how a lot of like LLM AI software will look going forward. We won't see, like, we might see some fine-tuned like original versions of LLMs, but I think it's going to be few and far between, and the behemoths will ultimately win.
Yeah, I think that there's there is circulating the web a recording of a particular person at a particular search engine saying, "I cannot believe we let OpenAI do this." On the back of a brand new brand. I mean, being able to launch a brand right now at this level is practically unheard of, right? It existed, but it was not certainly ubiquitous. And especially when they are connected to Microsoft and Microsoft Azure. And Microsoft Azure's products that they're going to release on top of OpenAI technology is just beautiful. I mean, it's already beautiful. And we'll get into how Google's I/O presentation mimics some of Azure, and people aren't even talking about that because Azure was talking about fine-tuning models oddly earlier than Google Palm was, where they're saying we can add medical training in order to create a medical experience, right? Well, Azure had that product page up quite earlier, so go check it out if you don't believe me. So one thing that makes me feel good about this is our audience. Thank goodness. That red slice of pizza is the pizza that no one wants at the pizza party. You got the smallest, thinnest slice. And this is Pac-Man chomping down. But only, I believe this probably nets to less than 5 user people said, "I'm just publishing stuff as it is." What does that tell you about trust? What does that tell you about adoption, of hesitance, about not wanting to let go of the wheel, versus how much do you think people are thinking critically about this? And I've got a follow up on what they're editing, but what's your take on seeing this as such a dominant force?
I think to the point of this audience, there's a solid amount of education, which we need to continue to do across the board, is like understanding what the technology is, what it's capable of, and what it's not capable of. But I do think this is also kind of highlights a new paradigm shift as we get to talking about content strategy and workflows of like editing is going to become more of the puzzle than original generation. And this reflects that.
I think, and like I mentioned on that recording, if you don't know the different types of editing, this is the time to learn what editors do. I mean, this goes to SEOs. Guess what? I thought I knew for years. I thought I knew what editorial did. And then, I started working for a company that had 300 people on editorial team. I didn't know anything about what they did. I mean, just get into that mode, do your research, phone a friend if they're an editor. I've got a number of webinars. One is great. I mentioned it at the top with Elite Editing's founder, talking about the difference between copy edits and developmental edits. What you don't want to do is go into this discussion thinking that editing is an SEO edit where you add words and optimize it, and that ain't editing, right? And that's where I think a lot of SEOs are falling flat on their face right now, is because they're getting drafts, and they've never been in a situation where they've received drafts. They receive a later stage item and they're touching it, or they've created recommendations pre-draft. They've never really been part of this actual process. So being the first time, lots of mistakes are being made. It's what I'm seeing with publishers. And this is publishers that have 20 writers all the way up to one Monday morning I was talking to about this, 900 writers. And so all of the above. So what are they editing? I love this because it gets into what I was just saying. And these are a combination of edits for fixing, but then you also get into subject matter expertise. I love that. I think that's going to be the key. Bias. Right? Fact checking. None of the above. Overall, though, and your perspective on this is a holistic editor. This is somebody who can do a lot. What's missing here is a comprehensive approach to developmental editing. And I think the reason why, and I'd like to take it on, is because we don't think that the thing we're getting the draft from could actually respond to a developmental edit because it's not a person. Right. So how do you look at this? Is, refining queries, refining prompts. When do you stop? Because do we think we can even do developmental? But then when you look at this, is this surprising to you?
No, it's not. And I think you really hit the nail on the head. One, the difference between proofreading versus editing, right? Like, we're not just talking proofreading, we're talking full developmental editing. And I think it also speaks to the idea of, as SEOs, as content marketers, our skill sets need to expand. You hear people freaking out saying, oh, AI is going to replace us. Like, no, that's not the case. It's the people who understand how to use these tools are going to replace you. Now is the time to learn how to do it. Learn how to edit if you don't already know that. Learn how to infuse humanity into the writing. And that's spoken to here is the education, understanding how these tools work and where the gaps are and where you as a person need to be able to go in, like fact checking, right? Like, we know that a large language model is basically a very sophisticated magic smoke and mirrors, like autocomplete, and because it is predicting the next word, but trained on billions of documents. So at least at this time, it gets facts wrong. And in your editorial process, that's critical that you have someone not assuming that anything that's in there is definitively correct. You need human eyes.
It needs to be authentic, right? And like you said, and we're going to get into more of this, but correct. Authentic is different than correct, right? Lack of bias, fair, and then readable, and that's, I think, for such a long time, SEO specifically, but everybody, we've had our bar at the Turing test. Does it look? Could somebody have written this? And we blew the Turing test away. That thing's gone. That's in the rear view mirror. That's in South Florida right now, and we're crossing the Georgia-Florida border. The Turing test kind of doesn't matter right now. And it needs to touch on all the things that great content touches. We've gotten there, right? And what we're also seeing right now is, if you don't check for facts, it can damage your site. PR impacts. I mean, I saw a site go to zero recently. I have the screenshot on my phone I saw the Google Search Console. I'm like, oh my God, I got to look at that later. And so we're seeing it, and it coming from mistakes. And you got to be aware that your readership may not know you made the mistake. If they're coming to you trying to answer a question and you answer that question, but you answer it wrong. I mean, there's so many bad things. And I heard someone say, they were talking about it's not a big deal with product descriptions, right? That was a comment somebody made. And I was like, it's a pretty big product description, because if you say that this product's for ages 1 and up, and that kid dies, that's on you and your product description.
Absolutely. I mean, that definitively right there is an example. But to your point, I mean, it's like, we're not saying with all this, whether it's SEO or content, generative AI isn't something that you shouldn't touch. Google's not going to penalize you for generative AI. It's the fact of, whether it's written by a person or LLM doesn't matter. It's just that it's actually correct.
Right. So the sourcing, I mean, you could have gotten a research scientist to do the work. You could have bought it on Fiverr. You're taking that and you're forming it into something beautiful. If you form it into something not beautiful, that's a problem. If you form it into something biased, you form it into something wrong, or you don't have the ability to audit that track how bill became a law, your business is at risk. I mean, your business is at risk. And I think I love the responses talking about, hey, we've got to think critically about these things, because that means that we're so far ahead of the curve. We're thinking critically, and kudos to everybody who did respond on this. So now, payload versus workflow. This is my topic. I love this. This is like every day of my life these days. It's like, I mean, I'm personally in a situation where I've been working on this for, half of a decade, 5, 6, 7 years. I've figured this out for my workflow, especially with writing, and with some of the new add-ons for taking transcriptions, tuning them, and I can do an amazing amount of work in a little bit of time with my cavalcade of AI solutions, right? It's amazing. This data points are amazing. Does it help? Yes. Does it hinder? Yes. Right?
That's what I love about this. I love this one because it really highlights the complexity of this opportunity, of this technology, that it does both for a lot of people.
Yeah. So how would you define, how would you be the explainer of this? Because I think even your explanation of it will likely be different than mine.
Oh yeah, the way I think about it is I can think about a bunch of different places that it helps my workflow, where, it helps me ideate, it helps me get a first draft out, it saves me time in the original creation process. But it might also hinder my workflow in that I now need to, spend a lot more time editing, which may or may not be like my main skill set. I need to do more fact checking. Basically, I interpret this as it changes my workflows in some good ways and some bad ways.
Yeah, I got you there. And I think what it illustrates for a lot, I see that. I think it illustrates that everybody needs to do a workflow check. I think everybody take a deep breath and let's do an old-fashioned, ugly, yucky process inventory and be real about where your time's going. Is it spent surfing the web and listening to podcasts? Are you watching webinars? Are you reading blogs? How much of your time is actually spent ideating? Is actually spent on keyword research, on analyzing your own inventory, on building briefs, on writing, editing, publishing, cleaning up, making it look good because you have a crummy CMS that nobody wants to update, and that, or optimization, or promotion even. You're sitting on Twitter, retweeting yourself. Where is your time going? And then you can say, is this helping or hindering? What happens is people are thinking about it like software adoption at first, and then they'll get into, is it actually helping me? So I think you've got to become an expert on the software to be able to truly know. It's a lot like when a company changes CMSs, right? You don't recognize the workflow improvements for a while because it's usually a yucky shift and it's very, very hard. So be thinking about where your time's lost today. And then you got to think about, what if the analogy I actually used yesterday is, if you're playing baseball and you hit 1 hit out of 10 at bats, you're batting 100. The answer to solving your problems with AI isn't to give you 40 at bats, right? Because you're going to get 4 hits. You might get less because you might be a little tired, right? And that's where I think people, oh yeah, I got 4 times as much out the door. Your hit rate is the same. Well, it's because they're thinking, oh, well, I quadrupled my traffic. Oh, but wait, you could have done a lot differently. You could have done it with less resources. You could have batted, 2 hits per 10. And so what the first wave of this is true productivity without improvement. And I think that's why we're seeing this change. And I think a lot of people are thinking about the payload, which is and how many articles or how many pages they're creating. But guess what? There's ways of doing fast articles. You can do repurposing today. It doesn't have to be with AI. So there's a lot of ways to get faster. What we got to be thinking about is how do we get faster and better and more efficient with our time. And in my case, me personally, I'm ripping out 40 hours of work in 4 hours, and those, and I'm like, yeah, all right. That's when you're really thinking critically about that whole manual labor part. You don't want manual labor. The mistake that people make here is also to say, would you have done it without AI? Would you have actually gone and hired that team and done that work, right? Or would you just not have done it? So I like to think of, what am I going to do that I wasn't going to do? There's a lot more overhead than people think in hours of time. So awesome feedback there from the group. Trust is weird, right? I don't trust a lot, right? Anything, but I love this. What's your take on 73%? Do you trust content generated by AI? Is it because they're SEOs and they really want people to trust it, or is this legit? Is this mainstream?
Actually surprises me. This actually surprises me, because I would, if you asked me this point blank question, do you trust content generated by AI? I think at this time, I would say no. I would say I assume that there's going to be issues with the content until I QA it. And, some of it, and it's interesting as we're seeing, things like, Bing integrated with ChatGPT, or, the search generative experience and Bard integrated with the internet. And I think it's going to become more trustworthy over time. But I would say I probably trust AI generated imagery a little better, although there's still the issues where you see, 6 fingers show up on a hand or things like that. But I'm surprised by this result. What do you think?
Very surprised. I'm in the red pizza pie slice here, and it's because of how much experience I've worked with it. I know the types of mistakes that are going to be made now before they make them, which makes me faster to feel good about an output versus not. I think a lot of people are asking, their accessible large language model questions that it actually can't answer. I was in my mastermind group, and one of the persons was talking about, they're like, it keeps getting this wrong. And I'm like, yeah, it can't get that right. But and it's key. Once you learn that, you only have to learn it once. That's the key. I love this, because once you learn that fact, it won't do that. Now account for that. Account for that issue. It's not going to hit the thing on the nose, and don't gawk at the bad outputs. Learn why it's a bad output, and it's not always garbage in, garbage out. You may have done a pretty good job and it's garbage out. You may have done a bad job and it's garbage out. It's maybe garbage, maybe in, maybe garbage out. And you've really got to know. And the more you work with it, the more you can guess where the mistakes are going to make. They're fun to gawk at, but it's like, it thought that, James Harden was Brendan Fraser. Yeah, like it picked the wrong winner of the Stanley Cup 2 years ago. Real example. Get over that, recognize how that could happen, and you realize either you can improve or it will never improve. Move on. If you're that subject matter expert, update that to say, that the Vegas Golden Knights are playing against the Florida Panthers this year, and it said Tampa Bay Lightning. It was wrong. Now you know why. You just got to make sure you update it, right? And that's really the key.
And to that point, I mean, what we are all learning is how to communicate with these tools. It's such a good call out of the garbage in, garbage out, because we're all learning. Yes, you already hear this joke about the idea of prompt engineering, like that. It's like glamorous, like new job out there. And to your point, you can do everything right, but you need to understand that we're not at the place that's removed trial and error from this process in our prompts. Like there is still a huge element of navigating and getting what you want out of it by asking in the right way. And if a good analogy is thinking about our relationship with search engines in general, 10, 15, 20 years ago, we knew that the only way we could find the results we wanted is by putting a singular keyword, that was lexical, that was the exact word we're looking for. Now the search engines, understand natural language processing, so we can add more context in our queries. This is the next level of that. And so we're learning how we can communicate, but it's still not at the point where you can just say anything and get exactly, like it can't read your mind. And even if it could, you can communicate and you still won't, to your point, get the exact output.
And just as Google went from lexical to flexical, yep, they did.
You did that.
Yep, they did. With their ability to understand context, now they're adding a third layer. They are looking at something that isn't information retrieval. In generation isn't retrieval of information. It's generation of something that could be helpful for your experience, with potential to show sourcing and present experiences, right? So that's a different search experience. That is a whole different way of thinking about getting through your journey, and something I know we'll talk about in a minute. But I love the way you broke that down with, I took information retrieval courses in college in the late 90s. Yep, that guy. And, it was like how to search with your intranet search, right? And it was like keyword must be in here in exact tense, in exact phrasing, in exact case. And if keyword appears, then that page could appear. There was a search engine called Ink2Me. And if you went and looked back at the way that worked, it was so basic. We would laugh at something like that, but and so you learned how to search so that you'd get the response you wanted with your intranet, back then. Now we're just, it is a completely different way, but you will adapt. And we'll get into search generated experience a little bit later, but this one blew me away. Quality of generations. And people are like, pretty good, right? But all of
I can't believe there's 30% at 4. I can't believe there's 30% that rated a 4 like that. Right. You and I are still like, because we understand the tech, we're still like, it is for someone who's never like experienced this. You do ChatGPT for the first time. It is mind blowing.
Oh yeah, well, mind blowing. Yeah.
But yeah, there's. It's pretty higher than I would have expected in terms of the quality.
Yeah, I think it requires you to do a kind of a head check of what you think quality is. Readability, high readability. Is it crafting a basic structure? I'll give, if we get time in the tail end, or if there's any questions. I just got a DM asking me about prompts, tricks with prompts. Everybody wants to know tricks with prompts right now, but I'll tell you a few. I'll tell you a few good ones about how to make sure that your outputs stay on story. But that's a good one. I think that's where his question was coming from. Getting some awesome questions in. And hi, Carl. Hi, Amy. We will get a great comment. I was thinking about the exact same thing about how we used search back then. Users are going to have to learn how to prompt, and that takes time. Exactly. Carl, any thoughts on AI and governments having too much control over people? We'll get into that a little bit after this one. Because it does relate to trust and adoption. And so thanks, Carl. Awesome questions as always. But it connects to general consensus of AI within your company. And the one thing I would, in a future one, I want to see people's perception department by department is going to be, I think, something I want to know. In my experience already, writers are spooked. Mm-hmm. Writers are like, don't like it, right? And then you get, as a general, just like in 2006, they were all like that about SEO. No writer wanted to hear SEO. That's why they made the term SEO content and SEO'd and SEO optimized, because those were ways to denigrate or debase that process, right? It's making my page worse, or it's a lower quality of content. I think you're going to hear some backlash. And is that AI content? Well, guess what? You're already hearing it, aren't you? And that's the same 100%. Thing. It's the same thing that group of humans did. The people who are in that red slice or the undetermined slice, come on, pick a lane. Is this content AI generated, right? Imagine saying, is this content optimized? Of course it's optimized, right? That's the same. It's part of that maturity curve. So what's your take on this being almost 50-50?
I mean, I'm happy about it, and I understand like it being undetermined because there are so many people who don't understand it yet. I think people generally are starting to get the fact that we're at a seminal moment in technology, that this is here whether you like it or not going forward. But, you know, whether or not, wherever you draw your line in the sand about, you know, how you self-identify as a brand, as a reputation, as the technology you're going to use, like you just, okay, a little bit of an example. You think about the way people use images in their content. Like, are you the type of person that only uses original images that you create yourself? Do you use stock photography? Do you use generate? You know, like, I feel like the way that people are thinking about this will evolve over time, and you'll have different types of groups. I think what's interesting too is like, there's a difference between journalism, just straight up informational content that anyone could create, and then thought leadership. And I think there's a certain, I understand the pushback on SEO because there's this perspective that you're gaming the system, because Google incentivize, or search engines incentivize, certain types of content which don't always feel like the best type of content. I think the future state, which we'll talk about a little bit, is hopefully eventually search engines can surface what is actually the best, most useful content, and you're not just trying to create what you think the search engine wants.
Right. I love that. I love the image example. So the debate then would be generated over stock.
Right.
Right. I've seen some wonderful Photoshop pros doing product placements with generated, and they look beautiful. I mean, it's like Minority Report when, you know, you turn the corner and like the fact you just thought of Pepsi. And it's because it literally had a really, really amazing product placement and you didn't even catch it. You just started thinking about it. I started to see people being very creative with product placement. You know, everybody's got to remember, though, those image generators, they have protections in them for a reason, so you have to edit them. Human faces look garbled and odd. It's because they don't want a human face, a dog face or an animal face, the fingers, stuff, you know, things with appendages, oddities, words. It's not going to have a word because that could be a typeface, it could be a brand. So you will have to do edits. It's very similar to this to get to a final product. So I think that some people, I actually heard somebody say this. They were like, I won't use any of those things because the faces on all the people creep me out. And I'm like, well, there's a reason for that. You can't do, you know, that's what somebody, you just, once you learn something like that, you know it forever. But until you know that, you didn't know it, right? It's just like reading your content. But no, I think it's really cool. And what do you think about, to Carl's question about, are we invasion of privacy, too much control? Is this a way of giving large businesses too much access to our personal information, or are they misusing public information, or is this something that has larger, more negative meaningful negative impact on privacy or other things?
I am not going to get too conspiracy theory or anything like that, but I'll say, going to Carl's question, because they're great questions. One, it's like living off the grid. You know, at this point, if you want to participate in society, I don't have any faith that like people don't already have our data. And if anything, search engines are becoming more personalized, which require more data. I think it is, you know, ethically, responsibly, government should ask for permission. Businesses should ask for permission. But do I have any faith that both capitalists or the government will or could enforce that? No, I don't. The EU is probably the best chance at any sort of like actual, you know, consequences to taking advantage of that. That said, I'm just a dude. I'm not important enough for anyone to actually care. So it's like, I'm willing, I think, to trade some data for a better experience. And I think that's the question everyone will need to ask themselves going forward is like, are you willing to trade your data for the grid?
As long as you know about it, or you know that your ignorance is bliss on it. You know, I think you got to calculate for yourself whether the juice is worth the squeeze on all of these things. And it's just the same thing as my location tracker on this thing, which, by the way, Apple's coming with all of this. But you know, some of these apps just work really well if the locations are on all the time. Even though it chomps up my battery, you know, if it only pings when the app's on, I'm having a weaker experience. And it makes sense why it's a weaker experience. Could they nefariously take that data and like know that when I'm walking down the street in this particular neighborhood, they should try to get me to go to a different pizza place? I'm talking about pizza a lot. I'm going to have pizza tonight, I think, because but you know, that's okay, right? That's you got to make the determination and the guess. There's a lot of bad stuff you can do with this, with large language model technology, with AI, with generated text, with generated speech. There's more that you can do bad with it than you can do good with it. And how will we ethically deal with that? There's a lot of questions, not for today. However, these are things that, you know, there are some amazing ethical scientists who you should be looking at AI ethics. And thankfully, they work at a lot of these companies. So I'll leave it there. But unless you have something,
I'll say if you want a little more pulp commercial on Netflix, there was a documentary called The Social Dilemma, which talks a lot about that. The idea that if something's free and you're not paying for it, you are the product. Your data is the product. So, you know, it's an ethical conversation. Yeah, it's a whole other thing. Let's talk content strategy.
I love content strategy way more than ethics. But I do like ethics too, and AI ethics are fun. So, you know, walk us through this awesome board game that I want to play right now.
So, as you know, going back to what we were saying earlier in the report findings, this idea that editing is critical, that there's so many tools out there that ultimately moving forward in this generative AI sort of content SEO world, you do need a strategy. You need to think about it both at an individual level, at a team level, at an organizational level, because if your brand and your organization doesn't have policies in place, chances are people are already, we saw issues with Samsung, people putting information into ChatGPT, but people are probably going rogue and using these generative AI tools to be more effective and efficient and more productive. And so it's just something I feel like as a brand, you need to nip in the bud and take by the horns. And so what that means is putting policies, workflows, integrations into place that'll work for you and your employees or your colleagues. It's not necessarily a matter of switching around your whole existing workflow. It's finding opportunities to bake these AI tools and processes into your existing governance, your existing strategy. So looking at this idea of, you know, looking at your existing goals and your existing content strategy and starting, and this is something everybody can do in their own organization right now, especially if you don't have that person who's sounding the bells of like, hey, generative AI is out there. It's an opportunity. We need to be aware of it. identifying those AI integration points. So looking for opportunities, whether it's in content creation, in content optimization, automation, and you're already probably doing some of these. So going through that, preparing your generative AI content plan. So, with your content teams, whether it's the designers, the writers, the video designers, like actually putting that content strategy into place and, kind of writing out, documenting what tools are you allowed to use, how are you going to use it, and speaking to that point is building your own prompt library. We were talking about the garbage in, garbage out, trying your best, knowing that it's hard to maintain consistency, whether it's in terms of text or images. Having a standardized prompt library that's approved across your different teams, whether it's, at a marketing level, at an advertising level, like however your, product marketing, product in general, customer support, how you're using that, building those libraries that your employees are empowered to use, and then putting the QA editorial in place, making sure that facts are getting checked, that biases is getting eliminated, that brand voice is consistent, optimizing those outputs, and then training, educating your employees, making sure everyone understands the governance, understands what they should or shouldn't be using, where it's okay, where it's not appropriate, how to make suggestions of improvement, and then maintenance. It's not a set it and let it, because as we said earlier on, this technology is improving so rapidly, and there's opportunities for brands to like create their own fine-tuned models. You can create a proprietary software, or you can use like amazing software that's out there, for content strategy, like some of the stuff that MarketMuse does, for instance, is like fits right into those strategies. So whether it's, out of the box or fine-tuned, you just need to have to start thinking about the plan now.
I love this because it's easy to envision that you're going all across this way. I think the things that I want to add to it, get into the, add a little knowledge at each, like a little nibble of knowledge at each thing. And but what I think the one thing is, if you are currently responsible for your writers, let's say you've been tasked with, you're in charge, hey, add AI to our company, Garrett, add a little AI in there, right? Which frankly is happening a lot all across the world, because they're coming to me and they're saying, is it MarketMuse a way that I can add AI? Certainly it is. And there's a lot more. But you got to come into it thinking about that entire workflow, right? That ideation, research, prioritization, briefing, writing, editing, publishing, promotion. And a lot of really astute editors and content strategists are saying, we've been through this already, right? We've done this with our own rubric, our own voice and tone documents, our own brief structures, right? And we're just adding additional sources to these things. Content governance needs to be enforced, but we've been through this before, right? And so this isn't so alien. So the fact that you got put in charge of putting AI in doesn't mean that you are in charge of, cleaning house of all the humans. So you're seeing the more astute players already go through it in that way. And I think this is a great escort for that. It's saying we've already adopted these components. We're adding some amazing efficiencies to each one. So we're not rushing to the end and turning this into a payload discussion. We can get 10 articles before, now we can get 20. Because what happens when you do that is you'll negatively impact the interpretation of your content without even knowing it. You will have, more likelihood of mistakes, more likelihood of disjoint content that doesn't tell a story, doesn't represent your expertise in the buyer journey. All of those mistakes will be more likely to happen if you don't go about it through this type of construct, right? And if you don't go through that, it can be a situation where you're losing and you're losing and you're losing and you're losing. You don't even know why. It's because you thought of these as unit blocks of content instead of thinking about it as kind of a refinement to your process. And so those are some components I wanted to add. And I think that this tells that story really well. It's not Mad Libs. It's not, a lot of people think you're going to get Mad Libs, but do you get perfect construct outputs from your writers when you put a brief in front of them? No. Many writers interpret briefs differently, right? And so be thinking about that. You want them to add creativity. You want these things to jump off the page, and nothing's different now because you've added AI to it, So a couple questions before we get into kind of the list of Q&A that I had for you. One relates to who in the organization is irresponsible for this adoption, right? Right now, what I'm seeing is it's being blopped on the head of edit. It's being blopped on the head of SEO. There's a technology person, right? This is a hard question because the output is something that writers who could be on commerce and be writing for money, and they could be on edit. Everybody produces this text, right? Then you have technology. So who should be in charge of this? Is this a new role? And then how do you go about advocating and educating? To me, that knowledge transfer square on this game board, the hardest one. I mean, it is tough.
It's so true. And the thing is, it's like SEO, right? It depends. Because there is no singular organizational structure. Like the enterprise versus the mid-market versus the two-person entrepreneurial startup, all has a different structure. And I think that the bigger question is, taking a step back, who's currently in charge of the governance of your content? Right. Outside of generative AI. And I think if you don't know who that is, that's the question you should address first. And then whoever is in charge of that role, it should be baked in the generative AI conversation. So maybe that's an easy out answer, but I think it leads to some important questions and some important self-assessment in terms of how you're addressing content.
I think self-assessment's critical. And I think my answer to the question is probably unpopular with regard to the way that RACI frameworks and EOS would answer it, which both when adopted are beautiful things. Is for now, until it's more mature, you're responsible, I'm responsible, we're all responsible for using this ethically and responsibly, because one hiccup and you could torch the entire company. You could torch their reputation, and all of our work is for naught. And it could be as simple as, obviously I like sports quotes because they're funny, but it could be as simple as saying, that the New York Rangers are still competing for the Stanley Cup final tonight, on the 3rd rather. They're not, by the way, and I'll cry about it a little later again. But could that damage your business, right? Could that damage, it could be a humorous joke in the daily news. It could be a huge gaffe if you are running hockeyreference.com. But what if it's something much more serious? What if it's something much more significant? It's not just about your money or your life. I fully expect your money and your life to be either expanded to nearly all content, or, because frankly, anything we buy then becomes your money or your life if you're misrepresenting.
Your example with the product marketing, with toys, it's like,
it just happened to be nearby. And it just happened to be nearby. I got toys everywhere. But I think, what's your take on, is this a way, and this was a question I received, are we going to lose authentic, real stories?
No, I don't think so at all. I think that you will see a stratification across different types of businesses and how they handle it, and it'll be part of your brand. And people, authentic brands that are able to hit that tone, whether they're using human generated content, AI generated content, a combo at different scales, you are what the public thinks of you, and that goes back to the content strategy and knowing your brand voice and your authenticity and how you want to handle it. And maybe that is your principle of like, we don't use generative AI content, for anything that we're doing. Like the same way you think of Patagonia as like an environmentally friendly company, there are those brands out there that's their brand values and their entire generations that respond to it. Or Ben and Jerry's, it's like there's political agendas or how you handle it. So I'm not concerned that everybody will be consumed by generative AI. And I don't think it's a bad thing. Like, I don't think it's a bad thing, but I get it if that's not your brand.
Mm-hmm. But you naturally have the bias because we're humans.
I'm biased.
He's biased. You heard it in his voice, right? He compared it to Patagonia, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, and you see all these comparisons. You see them in the markets because humans are automatically biased. We have a brain gap. We judge finished content differently if we think it's from a human versus a computer, right? Mm-hmm. We also will make natural metaphors associating this with, we might associate it with genetically altered products in my coffee, right? Because we are automatically associating it with something artificial, and artificial is bad. Artificial just is natural bias built in to just the framework of ourselves as humans to say artificial is less good than natural sweeteners. But the reality is something very different in a finished product, isn't it?
Well, going back to generative AI, I mean, like where I was having this whole conversation with Barry Schwartz of Search Engine Roundtable of how they were creating the search generative experience for Google, and that this idea of fluidity versus factuality in terms of the conversational nature. Like part of the problem with ChatGPT is it feels so conversational. They intentionally tried to make, the new version of the Google search generative experience, so basically the AI version of Google that they're experimenting with, more factual and not conversational, because we are susceptible to trusting what feels human, exactly what you're saying. So it'll be, I mean, that is one of those alarmist fears going forward, is like being able to differentiate the two.
I think you got to start, and we ran out of time, but my prompt is forget the prompts before you start writing. Dive in and already understand your point of view, what unique value you're going to bring, learn the story spine, the arc of the thing you're going to write, and let the generated content give you some ways to accomplish those things. It turns into beautiful things for me. AI SEO guide, iPullRank's AI and content and SEO friend or foe. When you download the other story, go download that. It's a beautiful piece. Really gives you a high level piece of information. Go find Garrett. iPullRank Agency on the Twitter, YouTube, iPullRank SEO, SEO Weekly, awesome show, fun, gives you kind of the breakdown of what to expect this week. Makes you have to read fewer blogs.
A lot of Jeff quotes in there, by the way. Jeff constantly is on Twitter throwing out these gems, and so you get into the SEO Weekly like every
quotable. I need to be a quotable notable as much as possible. But go check out the Rankable podcast as well, and everything that Garrett does at iPullRank, and Mike King, if you're familiar with Mike, some of the content that he's produced that gets into where that game board came from is truly leading edge, if not bleeding edge right now, for implementing this effectively for your search efforts or for your content efforts, or frankly for your business efforts, because this is about business solutions now more than anything. But Garrett, thank you so much. I'll give you last word, but I appreciate all the time and all the effort. And I can't wait till our next study after people have gotten more time using these types of solutions.
No, it is such a pleasure to such a great product and team with that you're running, Jeff, at MarketMuse, with Elizabeth and Steven, and y'all put out so much great content as well. Those webinars, the blog posts that you're writing, the guest posts that are out there. Definitely check out MarketMuse as well, because it's such a cool tool, and I love the scientific nature it applies to content. Like, we all are so focused on quality, and there's that balance, right, between between the scientific and the artistic that MarketMuse kind of helps you navigate so effectively. Thank you so much for having me. This report was a pleasure to work on, and I'm excited for future rounds of it. So this is great, and great crew. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
And yeah, thanks for joining. Awesome questions as well. And here's that URL again for this document. Share it with your friends, share it with your bartenders, share it with your mom and dad, because they actually know what AI means now. And we'll see you again soon. Thanks, Garrett.